Hello. So that panel discussion, that was a good discussion. I like that. It set the tone for what I want to talk about. I guess I'll introduce myself. I'm Ben Zavan. Some of you know me from when I was here at the U. I left in 2011 to leave for greener pastures when everything was getting bad, and apparently everything's gotten better since then. Figures. So I'm at Target now, and it's pretty green. And I want to talk about making DevOps change, because that's kind of something that it's been close to what I've been doing for a long time. Even back when I was at the U of M, what we were doing was DevOps. We were collaborating, we were automating, we were working together. When something broke in production, we all jumped in and tried to fix it. And back then, I didn't even realize the term DevOps existed. It was 3 years old at that point, but I didn't realize that it was a thing. So as I heard somebody on Arrested DevOps podcast say once, I've been doing DevOps since before it was DevOps, since it was work. So you've heard of DevOps. All day today, we've been talking about DevOps. So maybe I need to update this. Maybe you have been, hit the right button. That one. Yes. All right. So maybe your teams have been asking for DevOps. Maybe you've been trying to do DevOps as a grassroots movement, and you want to do DevOps. So how do you do that? How do you get from siloed environments working separately to be a real DevOps organization? And I'm gonna tell a story about how this presentation came to be. Last summer at DevOps Days Minneapolis, I spoke about doing DevOps as a grassroots movement, about leading up, about making change, about being change, about breaking through silos and getting communication and collaboration, and a culture of DevOps. And shortly after that, this happened. The DevOps Oversight Subcommittee of the Architecture Review Board. This is a real thing. This is a committee that I was on. We had weekly meetings. We talked about what DevOps was for our organization. We did a lot of talking about what DevOps was for our organization. We argued about what it should be. And despite sounding like and really solidly being an anti-pattern, it helped me define the next step in my DevOps journey, because a grassroots movement is only going to get you so far. You're going to get to a point where you can't move through some of these blockers without help from other people or help from above. So I knew that I wanted to do DevOps. I knew what it was. I knew why I wanted it. I knew what was blocking me, but I didn't really know how to get there. And then somebody asked me, what do you need? Which I hadn't really thought about. So they offered to, through this DevOps Oversight Subcommittee of the Architecture Review Board, and I apologize to the sign language interpreter because that's got to be terrible. Okay, good enough. But so through this committee, we were going to do a presentation. We were going to talk to senior leadership, and we were going to make the case for DevOps. So I had to think about, what am I going to ask for? What do I need leadership to do to help me move forward and help me get DevOps into my organization? So I did research, and after a while, the committee stopped meeting. So I went and I took that presentation that we already had, and I tore it apart and I rebuilt it. And I came up with what I thought was the best thing to put forward to move us into a more DevOps environment and what we needed leaders to do. But I do want to put out a gigantic caveat here. I quit that company before I talked to senior leadership and before we started making any real progress beyond where we'd already gotten. So this is all synthesized information that I've gathered from other people. There are a lot of bad puns in this presentation, but I've gathered it from other people's presentations and other people's talks and other people's experience, and I put it together to figure out what I thought we could do in my organization. So this is what I think is the right way forward. If you're still not convinced that DevOps is the right way to go, and especially if you are in leadership and you really care about the bottom line, I wanted to point out a few statistics here. This is from the State of DevOps report that Nicole Forsgren put together with Puppet. Actually, Nicole did the data crunching on it. High-performing organizations do 200 times more frequent deploys. 200 times more frequent. They do it with a 3 times lower change failure rate. And I had to get clarification on that. That does mean that they had 60% more failures in the same, 60 times more failures in the same time period, because they're doing 200 times as many changes. But they have a 24-time faster recovery from failure, which means that if they do have a problem, if they do break something, it's not as much of a big deal because they can recover from it quickly. They can roll back, they can roll in a fix. And that's also because they have a 2,555 times shorter lead time. That's from commit to production. So if you think about an average organization, at least in my limited experience, an average organization has maybe 3 days of lead time. If you're doing pretty well, maybe a week. If you think about what 2,000 times that is, what is 6,000 days? That's a decade. So I think about that as, if that's me, that's what I look like to them, right? High-performing organizations are getting stuff done so fast that it feels like I'm doing it in a decade and they're doing it in 3 days. And in addition to that, despite the fact that they have a 60 times higher failure rate in production, they're spending 22% less time on remediating changes or remediating production issues and rework, unplanned work, and 50% less time on remediating security issues. And that's because they're talking to security up front. So if you think about that, what can you do with 22% of the time you spent on rework? If you get that back, what can you do with 50% of the time that you spent on security problems in the last year? If you get that back, what can you do with it? And my favorite statistic is employees in high-performing teams were 2.2 times more likely to recommend their organization as a great place to work. How many people would recommend your current organization as a great place to work? Imagine twice that many people. That was almost everybody in this room, by the way. So that's good. You're doing a great job. So now, you know you want DevOps. How do you get some DevOps? Yeah, I'm a target, but I started making this slide deck. This isn't the slide deck for the committee, by the way. This is an expansion on that I created out of that. Back at the DevOps road trip last fall, Heather Mickman, who was at Target at the time, was talking about Target's new CIO in 2015, Mike McNamara. And he came in and he said, I want Target to become agile. I want all of our development to become agile. And just by saying that, he started the ball rolling. As the CIO, he said, I want all of us to be doing agile. And today, almost everything at Target is agile. There are a few holdouts, but there are very few. It's not as systemic as it is in some organizations. So I think the most important thing that you can do as a leader in your organization to get what you want is to tell people what you want. Tell people you want DevOps. It's not enough to do a reorganization or to tell your managers or your directors what you want the organization to be. You need to tell everybody. You need to do it clearly, and you need to tell them you want DevOps. So you say you want DevOps, but what does that actually mean? And it looks like Andy didn't make it back, but this is as close as I get to the unicorn poop slide. So just want to make that clear. So yeah, what do you want when you say you want DevOps? What I want, when I say I want DevOps, is teams that foster a culture of inclusion, safety, and innovation. Because your innovation is going to be worse if you don't have a culture of inclusion. And that culture of inclusion is going to give you the safety that you need to innovate. You want practices that design and build for long-term success and stability, because if you build something and get it done and it's not good, or it's hard to maintain, or it's hard to extend, you don't really have a good product. And you want an organizational structure that makes sense for the outcomes you want, whether that be dedicated application teams or functional teams. So what is a culture that fosters diversity, safety, and innovation? Matt Sakaguchi had a presentation, which I have links to a number of these presentations that I'll have at the end, but he had a presentation of the 5 dynamics of effective Google teams. You'll notice this looks a lot like Maslow's hierarchy, if anyone's done any psychology. At the very bottom of it, psychological safety. This is the most important thing that you can have in your company. If you have employees who want to leave because they don't feel safe, you don't have a good environment. You need dependable teams and dependable people. When people say they're going to do something, they do them. And they're not going to do that if they don't feel safe to go out and do it. You need structure and clarity. The team has to have clear roles, clear plans. You can't just go out there and just try to do stuff. You have to know what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. You need to have meaning. This is, I feel like the middle two, they definitely need to be there, but the bottom and the top two are the most important to me as a personal standpoint. Your work should be personally important to team members. Every person should be able to track every line of code that they write back to the organization's mission. And they should believe in that mission. And your team members should believe that their work matters and creates change and has an impact in the world. At the U of M here, you've got a great mission. You are making an impact. You are educating the future of tomorrow, of today, which is tomorrow. So as a corollary to this, you also need to make sure that the people who work on your teams know that you care about them. It's not enough for them to care about the organization. The organization has to care about them. You need to be able to provide them everything that they need to be successful and to be happy. Give them training, send them to conferences, have events like this. I have to use this picture in every presentation I do. You need to consider the human cost in your bottom line. It's not just, am I going to make a buck tomorrow? It's, am I going to have happy people making happy software? Because if you have unhappy people, you're going to have unhappy software. And unhappy software is not successful. You don't win with unhappy software and unhappy people. Minimize. This is a little bit of micromanagement, but minimize the alerting that you're doing in your software, in your applications. Only alert on something that is worth waking somebody up at 2 o'clock in the morning or pulling them out of dinner with their family. And when you do get an alert and it is actionable and is a real problem, it becomes a backlog item, and you need to understand when you're planning work that these backlog items are just as important as every other backlog item, because if you create a piece of software and you put it into production, it works perfectly as far as the end user is concerned, and you're waking somebody up every Tuesday morning at 2 o'clock, that piece of software is going to be hated, and it's not going to be maintained, and it's not going to be improved. Another aspect of psychological safety, I saw this came up in one of the open spaces, blameless postmortems, which this is not. I was walking down a hallway and I saw this on a whiteboard, and I kept on walking to go and get my glass of water from the cafeteria, and then I turned around and came back and took a picture. Blameless postmortems. Well, this is not a blameless postmortem. In the pursuit of something new and better, you took action that was disruptive, which failed to go according to plan. Kill that person, how dare they? Given that this is in a slightly different handwriting, I'd like to assume that this is a joke. I'm hoping. So we can ignore that. But for one, you didn't take action. We took action. As a team, we took this action. It failed to go according to plan, but that should be okay, because we should have a rollback strategy, or we should be able to roll in a fix right away. Any failure is an opportunity to learn what doesn't work, and you've heard that several times today, and it's absolutely true. Amazon's S3 outage a couple of weeks ago, that was an opportunity to learn. It was an expensive opportunity to learn, but it was an opportunity to learn. The person who mistyped a command, I will bet you that already that process is not carried out in that way anymore. There's some other wrapper around that that prevents that from happening ever again. So when you've got the freedom to fail, you have the freedom to innovate. And if you give your teams the freedom to fail, you'll have teams that will innovate. If you look at how you can do things differently, you should be asking, what happens if we do it this way? Rather than saying, we've never done it that way, so let's not do that. Diversity and inclusion also came up in open spaces, which is great. If you have a team where everyone looks and thinks the same way, you have a lack of diversity. There are a lot of different people out there. There are gender differences, there are sexual differences, there are visible and invisible minorities, different backgrounds, different incomes. There are gay people, bisexual people, polyamorous people, gamers, people who like sports for some bizarre reason. So when I was a kid, when I was in high school, I was a nerd, and I totally still am. I'm just a professional nerd. And I was not a sports fan. I'm still not a sports fan. I hated the jocks, just like every other nerd my age. But the term scrum comes from sports. So if we didn't let the jocks into our club, we wouldn't have the term scrum. So you can take that as a good or a bad thing. I think that all of your teams should pass the Bechdel-Wallace test. You should be able to have two women talking about work without talking about a man. And it should be a regular event, because if you look around, probably you regularly have two men talking about work without talking about a woman. And the same goes for all types of people, gender differences, other differences that I've mentioned earlier. And even better, you should have code reviews that pass the Bechdel-Wallace test on a regular basis. Because if you don't, you're missing out on a lot of opportunities. At DevOps Days last fall, I talked about Microsoft's facial recognition login that wouldn't recognize black people because they didn't have high enough contrast in their algorithm. So it just wouldn't let them log in. Talk about a cultural technology divide. So how do you get this diversity? Well, it goes back to telling people. You want a diverse candidate pool. Diverse pool, yeah? Yeah. So I worked really hard on trying to find something that would work, and this was the best I could come up with. It's someplace in Arizona. They have a lot of pools there. So tell your HR department you want a diverse candidate pool. You want a specific target. You want, say, half of your interviewees to be women, or 30% of your interviewees to be people of color. Give them actual solid measurable targets, things that they can actually work for and they can accomplish, and you can measure that you're making progress on it. And when you're doing this recruiting and you're sending people out to find diverse recruits, there are a lot of organizations that you can send people to and you can send recruiters to. But when you're doing it, be careful. Don't send me to a Women Who Code or Women in Technology event. I'm not the right person to send. Don't send me to the girls who code. That's creepy. And when you're finding people on your teams to go out to these places, like, okay, you're going to choose a woman or a woman of color to go to the Women in Tech event, make sure they want to go, because you're talking about a group of people who have to deal with diversity issues every day at work. So maybe they don't want to have to deal with them explicitly head-on in doing recruiting. And when you do find somebody who wants to do it, or is at least willing to do it, don't make it in addition to their regular work. Make it part of their regular work. If you send somebody to an after-hours event or a happy hour, make sure they're paid for it, or make sure they get flex time for it, or both. Don't do what Trump did at his press conference and say, "Hey, you're black. Why don't you send some of your black friends over to talk to me?" That's not cool. You need to be actually active about this kind of thing. And also with psychological safety, we're still on psychological safety. Make it clear that people should be free to call out problematic things. Having a diverse team is one thing, but keeping a diverse team is another thing. If you hire somebody who doesn't feel comfortable on that team, they're going to quit. They're going to go someplace else, as they should. If the most junior engineer is in an elevator with the CEO and the CEO tells an off-color joke, that junior engineer should feel free to say, that was not cool and you should not do that. And the CEO should respond with, you know what, you're right. I should not have done that. Just a quick question. When I said junior engineer, who automatically thought that was a woman? Who automatically thought that was a man? Yeah, that's implicit bias. Keep an eye out for implicit bias. Celebrate the differences on your team. A lot of times teams will go out and they'll do the things that everybody wants to do. If they're doing a happy hour, or if they're bringing in donuts or bagels or something, and having events on site or off site, they're going to be basing that around the things that bring them together with their commonalities, but the differences are just as important. So if you've got somebody who has celiac and doesn't do gluten, have a gluten-free baking event. Everybody gets to try it out, everybody gets to see what works and say, hey, you know, this is actually kind of cool. Don't always center your celebrations around alcohol, because not everybody drinks. Don't always celebrate around meat, because not everybody eats meat, especially pork. And as long as you're celebrating, celebrate your accomplishments. Celebrate all of your accomplishments. I used to think that if you're doing IT right, nobody knows you exist. That is wrong. People should know that you exist. People should know that you're accomplishing things. People should know that the site is up because you kept it up. And leadership should make sure that people know that they're appreciated and that their work is valuable. Buy pizza. Hey, we had a 0 downtime release yesterday. Everybody gets pizza. Everybody gets a t-shirt. Zero downtime Friday t-shirt, whatever. It doesn't have to be big. It just has to be some kind of an acknowledgement, some kind of a celebration. If you're doing organization-wide meetings, make sure that IT is mentioned, because too often they aren't. And one way to see how you're doing in progress is to do a safety check. Liz Keogh, Lunivore, at, I forget the conference, but it actually came up in one of the open spaces, was doing a talk called Leadership at Every Level, which I have a link to at the end. But a safety check should be an anonymous thing. You should have a Google survey, or it would be a 1-question survey. It would be a number 1 through 5, or Post-it notes that are all the same color with markers that are all the same color. People can write down and throw it in a fishbowl. And then you can create a graph. If you get a lot of 4s and 5s, that's awesome, because people should feel like they're free to say what needs to be said. If you get any 1s or 2s, that's not good. It means you've got something to improve. Don't blame the 1s and 2s. Blame the system that caused the 1s and 2s to happen. I feel like I'm being kind of a downer here, but as you get up into the 4s and 5s, you're gonna find out that you've got a really solid team, and they work together really well, and they collaborate really well. You know, if somebody, and this doesn't have to be just work things. If somebody is, if it's Friday afternoon, somebody's leaving and says, "Hey, what are you doing this weekend?" Can they say, "I'm going out to a movie with my girlfriend"? Is that going to be a problem? Another way to think about it is behavior-driven management. Probably every developer in here has seen this format: given, when, then. Given, the boss gives the team directions. When someone disagrees, then a productive discussion occurs. How often does that actually happen? A lot of times when somebody disagrees, a not very productive discussion occurs, and that's not cool. And leadership should make it clear that if somebody disagrees with them, they're going to have a productive discussion about it. And either maybe it still turns out that the person who made that decision gets their way, but at least they understand why they're doing things that way. Because that's one thing that people in IT really need, is to know why they're doing things. It's not enough to just be told to do something. You need to know what's the motivation for it, what's the outcome, what's the end game for this. Why are we reorganizing again? Why are we moving my desk again? Why are we writing stuff in Ruby? So on to the practice. When you tell your teams that you want a practice that designs and builds for long-term success and stability, what does that mean? Some people are going to be upset about this slide. You need to have some process for gating major new components into production. Everyone should know what this process is, but it shouldn't be a zero-friction process. If you're already running WordPress, maybe you should consider not spinning up some other blog engine that I can't think of any names of, because there really aren't any. If you're writing stuff in PHP, maybe you shouldn't bring on a Java application, unless it is actually the right tool to solve the problem. Make sure that people do have the tools that they need to solve the problem, and make sure that when you're putting stuff into production, you've got a similar enough stack that it's supportable across the board. How easy is it for a person from one team to move to another team and pick up and start working? How long does it take to get them on board? What do they need to learn? When you're giving team goals, give them outcomes and challenges rather than tasks and solutions. Tell them what you want when it's done, not how to get there. Because your teams exist, and your teams were hired because that's what they're good at doing. So let them do it. Iterate, be a part of it, but only be a part as long as you're adding value. Respect their velocity and their burn down. This actually goes back to when somebody gets paged, it goes into the backlog. That has to be burned down just as much as everything else. Those teams should have retrospectives and figure out what they're doing well, what they need to do, what they want to do more of, what they want to change. And yeah, be part of it, but don't micromanage it. Prioritize good practice. Make sure that your teams know that you want them to do their work the right way, not the fast way, or the expedient way. Why should you push something out to production that makes somebody turn their device sideways? That's ridiculous. How long does it take to write a second style sheet? Or to make a flexible style sheet? Make sure that your teams aren't just getting stuff done on time and under budget. Make sure that your teams understand it's going to take longer now. And I know it's going to take longer now. And that's okay, because it's going to be better in the long run. It's going to save us money in the long run. A direct contributor to that, TDD, BDD, CI, and CD, and I apologize for the acronyms again. Continuous testing, behavioral testing, continuous delivery and integration. If you want to get to the point where you're pushing code 200 times faster than everybody else, it better work. And you better have a test. And you better not have somebody having to go over to a computer and push buttons to find out if it works. That should be automatic, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't go to production. Or maybe you can look at it and say, that one feature that's broken, we can live with that because we need the rest of it. And continuous improvement, Kaizen. It comes out of the Toyota production system, which the United States called Lean because they couldn't use Toyota because they were in the car industry. I think it was GM that brought it over. Constantly work toward improvement. Constantly add new goals. If you can, do chaos engineering. Throw Chaos Monkey out in your system and have it take out systems. That's the kind of thing that people get paged for. And if you can make it so it's no big deal, if one of your systems goes down, nobody gets paged. You have a happier team. Build in resilience architecture to accommodate the Chaos Monkey. At Velocity New York this fall, I was watching a presentation on architecture reimagined from Tammy Butoh at Dropbox. And Dropbox is at a scale where they're self-hosted because it makes sense again. They've gotten big enough that paying somebody else to run their data center stops making sense. When they want to do resiliency testing on their systems, they walk into the data center, they pick a rack at random, they shut it off. They do it while people are on the system. Hopefully nothing breaks. Usually it doesn't. If it does, they fix it. They find out why it broke and it never happens again. I assume that Amazon does similar things. I know Netflix does similar things using things like Chaos Monkey. And when it comes to making organizational decisions around DevOps, you need an organization that makes sense for the outcomes that you want. But what does that mean? Conway's Law comes up here. Does anybody know Conway's Law? A couple people. So Conway's Law states that I'm going to paraphrase this terribly, but organizations tend to build systems that have communication structures similar to the communication structures of the organization. So if you have a highly siloed environment where communication is difficult and always has to go up to a manager before it can go over to another silo, you're going to have a highly siloed set of applications. If you want applications that work well together, you need teams that work well together. If you want applications that talk to each other, you need teams that talk to each other. Stolen again from Liz Keogh and Leadership at Every Level. Most organizations have a bureaucratic structure, which means that power comes out of position, coordination is done by rules, decisions are made because of hierarchy, and motivation comes from extrinsic rewards, paychecks. A meritocracy, often held up as an ideal organizational structure. Power comes from knowledge, coordination from mutual adjustment, decisions from logical argument, and motivation from personal mastery. And I think that's a little bit self-centered in some ways. Meritocracy leaves a lot of people behind, but not as many as bureaucracy. The adhocracy, which when I heard this term I thought it had to be fake, but it's actually been around for decades. Power comes from action. So the people who are making the change are the people who have the power. Or I like to think of it as people have the power to take action. Coordination comes from opportunity. Hey, you're releasing this thing to production, my thing should go with it to production because they go well together. Decisions should be made through experimentation. It's not, let's put this in because I think it's awesome. Let's see what happens if I put this in because it might be awesome. And motivation comes from achievement. When you're winning, you're motivated to continue winning. And as you're making organizational changes and other changes, beware the anti-pattern. It's really common when production changes cause problems to stop having production changes because production changes cause problems, therefore production changes are bad. But what you should do, as was alluded to this morning, is make more production changes, make smaller production changes, do it more often, but also increase discipline around those changes within teams, increase automated testing, increase verification, make sure that you have got a solid repeatable plan and a rollback plan. And do not think that because you're doing automated deploys, you're doing DevOps. If you're doing automated deploys, you're using computers the way that they were designed to be used. Computers were literally designed for automation. So if you're doing automation, you are using computers. You are not doing DevOps. However, you can't do DevOps without doing automation because DevOps is not about using computers incorrectly. These are the sources. The QR code leads to where these slides are posted on SpeakerDeck. Obviously, the organization organizers will have a list, but if you wanted to scan that, that's cool. You'll notice a lot of these names are women, and I think that probably 80% of what I've learned about DevOps in the last 2-3 years, I've learned from women. And that's one of the things that, one of the reasons that I think that it's really important to have diversity everywhere, whether it's your workplace, your conference, your social life even. If you don't have these diverse perspectives, you're missing out. Effective DevOps, it's a long read, but it's a good book. It's kind of like this talk. It's more aimed toward leadership, but I think that individual contributors are going to get a lot out of it because, again, like this talk, you know what to ask for. You know what's missing. But yeah, I would highly recommend going and looking at all these resources. Some of them are talks, some of them are blog posts, some of them are videos. And with that, I'll open up to questions if there are any. Don't be shy. Was I really that good? Let me ask a question then. Hey Ben, you keep talking about diversity and how important the opinions of women are. Why isn't the opinion of men important? Why do you not want to have organizations that are made up for men's advocacy? Well, those exist. And it's pretty much the last 500, 2,000, 10,000 years of history. They've existed. And I think that at this point, it's time to hear some other voices that haven't been heard.
I actually have a question.
Okay.
On one of the slides in the middle of your deck, you were talking about this safety check.
Yeah.
Where people can vote in like a 1 through 5. And I'm certainly not going to suggest that people that I work with are going to lean this way, but there you go. What would you recommend in the eventuality that, say, you did this and you did get a fair share of 1s and 2s? What's a good way out of that?
Yeah, it does get tricky. I think one of the things that you should do is look at this and look at what the culture is like. What happens when people do speak up? I think a lot of the times you're going to find that the 1s and 2s are going to be women and minorities, especially visible minorities. Think about what your culture is like, and think about what happens when people disagree. Think about what your turnover looks like, and try to find the spots, especially the things in the earlier part of my talk, the blameless postmortems, the freedom to fail. What is the reaction from leadership like, and how can you address that? And the higher you go on the org chart, the more important it is to make this clear going down to the lower areas of the org chart. Is the CIO, CEO level can be very distant from what's going on in the organization, but they need to know if they have happy people. Doing an engagement survey and saying, well, okay, 70% of our people are happy, that's great. Those aren't the interesting people. The 30% who are unhappy are the interesting ones. It's like when you're doing metrics, often you ignore, if your 95th percentile is good performance, you ignore the other 5. That's where the interesting stuff is. That's where you can make a lot of improvements. So when you're looking at metrics, if you're looking at surveys, if you're looking at feedback, concentrate more on the problems that people have than on the successes, at least when it comes to making improvements. Obviously, the successes are something that you want to keep going. If everybody says they love Bagel Friday, keep Bagel Friday, because if you get rid of it, that's just the one thing that everybody loved. And yes, he's laughing. That's at a previous employer, that was in fact the case. We had an engagement survey. Everybody said they loved Bagel Friday. That's great, but what about the rest of the culture? Did that answer the question? Okay.
It occurs to me that at a higher level, all of this organizational discussion in team building, team working applies to not just DevOps or, and so
Absolutely.
my question is DevOps ahead of the game or is it behind? In other words, are there other organizational structures that led the way or paved the way for this, or is this something that came up out of the community that you know of, and then could help other communities?
That is a very complicated topic. I think that DevOps is ahead of the game because IT has been behind the game. I think that IT has often been seen as the fungible resource that you can, a system administrator quit, so that's fine. We don't need to rehire. We're spending too much time and too much money on IT, so we're not going to improve the situation there, and we'll reduce headcount by attrition, which of course means that you're going to lose all your best people because all your really motivated people are going to be just as motivated to leave as they are to work for you. But yeah, I think there are a lot of other industries that have done a really good job, but I think the general industry trend, and I'm saying this is a gut feeling, not scientific, but I think a lot of industry trend is toward the bottom line, not toward culture and not toward having success within a company as well as success of a company. And I think that there's a lot of short-sightedness in that, and that's where I think DevOps has been looking around and saying, all these startups that have a great culture, fundamentally, I don't even remember what direction to go on here, but fundamentally, a startup is in the adhocracy generally, because startups, everybody is already helping everybody else. Everybody's taking action as needed. Everybody's doing experimentation. They really want to be successful, and that's their motivation, is achievement. So I think that a lot of the Silicon Valley startups and a lot of other startup companies and small companies, entrepreneurships, have kind of shown that you can be really successful if you have a really good culture. And it matters as much what your culture and your internal procedures are as it does what your capital spend looks like.
So DevOps is a culture.
I believe that DevOps is primarily a culture, yes. Yeah. I think that it's really difficult to really express, but yes, I think that culture is the most important aspect of DevOps. I think that culture is the Venn diagram center of culture and tools and practice and goals. It's also the Venn diagram center of development and test and operations and the customer and infrastructure and everything coming together and actually being in the same place working towards success.
My small working group has a book club. Once, every quarter we read a book. And I would recommend for this group, The Phoenix Project.
Yes.
Has anyone read that? The characters are flat, the story is pretty hokey, but it marches you through in putting in place a good DevOps system, culture, thinking. It created a lot of dialogue in our group, and it changed our vocabulary, even how we talk about things, rework now, and we identify these things. It was really a help. the Phoenix Project. I don't have the author.
I would absolutely agree with that. I will admit I've never read it, but I have heard so many people say so many good things about it that it's probably the next thing I'm going to read. One caveat that I have heard is you should not stop at the beginning. Because if you stop at the beginning, you're not going to learn anything. You're going to learn all the wrong things to do because there are a lot of anti-pattern examples up front. And you get to meet some of these. Is it Doug or the
names are just
the
generic.
the angry bastard sysadmin or wherever totally an anti-pattern.
I'm looking on Google right now. It looks like it's a novel by Jean Kim, George Spafford, Kevin Bear. Does that sound right?
I'd buy that.
And I'm sure you can get it from the U libraries for free.
And it's probably on Safari. From O'Reilly, not from Apple.
Would anybody else have any other questions? Any follow-ups? If not, Travis?
This is really more of a comment or observation, I guess, that I've made kind of for many months, I guess, is we frequently see sort of like a particular group of men who will say, you know, they support women getting equal rights and feminism and such, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm glad that, you know, they had that march and they have those meetings, and then that's it. And I'm like, well, that's not really supporting it. And, you know, the thing about it is, and I think this kind of applies to any isms, but specifically sexism, that, I mean, to a great degree, it's a man's problem because we're the ones that create the problem. And ultimately, the change doesn't need to come from, oh, well, it's the woman's obligation to go out and fix this problem. And it's like, no, it's the man's obligation to fix this problem that we have created. So I think that in general, more men need to understand this, and it needs to be more of like, you know, when you see something happen, like, you know, when you're conversing with your friends and your colleagues, it's not just saying, well, it's cool that they're doing that. Like, no, you have to do more. Like, you have to identify that you're part of that problem, and when you see something, like, you have to like stop people and be like, hey, you know, that's kind of sexist, or if it's racist, you know, it's the same story there. Is, you know, be more active on an individual level and, you know, a micro level, just whenever it's around you, and not just be like, oh, well, you know, it's cool that they're doing this thing to help themselves. Like, no, we need to fix ourselves. So that's my point.
That is absolutely true. This calling things out, if you see something, say something. If you hear something, say something. It's absolutely true. One thing that it came up in the diversity conversation, the open spaces, one thing that I started doing years ago is when I'm in a meeting, I kind of take the temperature of the room by paying attention to who gets interrupted. And most of the time it's women who get interrupted. And when that happens, I try to speak up and add on to what she said and say, you know, I think I like what Sarah was saying, and I think we should talk about that a little bit more. And that calls out, hey, this person said something, you just stomped over them, but that was something that we should be paying attention to, and something we should be listening to. And that's just one of many, many different ways that you can do it. Another person in the diversity discussion talked about how a lot of times the angry white male needs another angry white male to tell them they're doing it wrong. And they're not going to listen to the woman who just got talked over. They need somebody to tell them, hey, you need to calm down, stop being so emotional, and let the women talk.
Well, shall we thank Ben? That was a really thought-provoking speech.
Thank you.
And Debbie Gillespie with some parting thoughts?
Yes.